Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Thank you so much, and it's wonderful to be here with you this morning. And welcome to those of you who are joining us from an undisclosed location. Welcome. I need to update my bio. I retired from leading the Lennox House group in Oakland, and I've had another book come out, which is The Wisdom Stories of Tibet. So I have to get that corrected. I feel that the truths of Buddhism are universal. And so I often share stories from other cultures, and I'd like to share a story with you today from Africa. And it's a story about fear. So settle in, and here is a story called The Monster Who Grew Small. Once long ago, in a village in Africa, there lived a small boy, and he lived with his uncle, who was called the Brave One, the Mighty Hunter. Now, he was called the Brave One because he was famous for killing large animals, but he was very horrid to his nephew because he thought the boy was a coward. And in fact, the boy was afraid of just about everything. He was afraid of the crocodiles that live in the river. He was afraid of the spiders and snakes that dwell in the shadows of the forest. And he was even afraid of the sounds at night in the thatched roof of their small cottage. And his uncle told him, well, those are just lizards and rats. But the boy knew they were something much worse. Well, one day as he was running along the path that led from their hut to the village, he came to the scariest point in that path. And all of a sudden he heard a voice, some being calling out for help. Well, immediately the boy himself was afraid, and he stuck his fingers in his ears and started to run away. But then a voice in his heart said, whoever owns that voice is even more frightened than you are. And since you know what it is to be afraid, shouldn't you offer to help? So he steeled his courage and made fists from his hands to make him feel braver, and he ventured into the brambles, into the thicket of the forest. Well, there he found a tiny rabbit that was tangled up in vines. And the boy freed the rabbit and petted her, to calm her down. And she looked up at him with such gratitude, and she said, you must be very brave to come into the forest by yourself. And he said, oh no, I am not brave. In fact, they call me Miobi, which means the frightened one. And the rabbit said, well, what are you frightened of? Why are you frightened? And the boy told her, I'm frightened of the crocodiles. I'm frightened of the spiders and the snakes. And she said, well, I think what you need is a house that's 3 cubits thick. A cubit is from here to here. That's a cubit. And the boy said, well, that wouldn't help. Because if there were no windows, I would be afraid I couldn't breathe. And if there were windows, I'd be looking out them, wondering what was going to come in the night to eat me. So the rabbit said, well, I'd like to help you in some way, What can I offer you that you need? And the boy said, well, what I really want is courage. But I don't suppose you could give that to me. And she said, well, I can't give it to you, but I can tell you where to find it. And he said, that would be wonderful. Why don't I walk you back to your home and you can tell me? And she said, well, you can't come to my home because I live in the moon. But I'll tell you how to find courage. Well, the next morning before his uncle woke up, and the rabbit also said, as you make your journey looking for courage, if you get frightened, stop and look at the moon, and I'll help you and tell you what to do. And so the next morning, before his uncle woke up, the boy started out, and soon he came to the river with the crocodiles, and he was so frightened. But he looked up at the moon, and he knew what to do. And he shouted to the crocodiles, surprising even himself, "If you want to be killed today, come and attack me." And then he dove into the river and made his way to the other side. And the crocodiles were very embarrassed, but they were afraid of the skinny little boy, so they submerged themselves under the water. And Niobe made his way along the path. Well, of course, the next thing he came to, 2 enormous serpents in the road. Each one was big enough to swallow an ox whole. And Niobe, again, very frightened, but he looked up at the moon, and he said to the serpents, "Oh, honored and intelligent serpents, look at me. I'm far too skinny to satisfy both of you if you divide me in half. So by which one of you will I have the honor of being eaten?" Well, of course, right away the snakes started fighting with each other. And as they did, Niobe went on his way. And, as he walked along, he felt a kind of spring in his step. And he heard himself whistling. And for the first time, he found himself enjoying the beauty of the forest, the beautiful flowers and butterflies and the bright green leaves. And he made his way along that path feeling quite content. But soon, off in the distance, he saw a village. And he heard the sound of lamentation. And as he entered the village, he could see little goats that were female goats that were crying because they hadn't been milked. And he heard babies crying because their mothers were ignoring them. So he didn't know what was going on. But he made his way to the hut of the headman and stepped inside. Well, there was the headman with his fingers in his ears, ashes on his head, trembling in fear. And he said to Niobe, "What do you want?" And Niobe said, "Well, I'd like to know what you want. Why is everyone in this village so afraid?" And the headman said, "Well, you'd be afraid too if you were going to be eaten by a monster." Niobe said, "A monster? Where is this monster? What does it look like?" And the headman said, "Well, it's quite as large as the royal barge, and it lives in a big cave at the top of the mountain. And it breathes fire and belches smoke, and it's going to eat all of us." And Niobe, quite surprised, said, "I will go and challenge the monster." And the headman said, "Well, that's wise. Then you'll get eaten first, and you won't have to wait around to get eaten the way we are." So Niobe went out, and he looked up at the mountain. Sure enough, there was the monster at the top of the mountain, with the head of a crocodile, the body of a hippopotamus, and the tail of a snake. And he didn't know what to do, but he held his dagger in his hand, and he looked up at the moon, and he started up that mountain. And as he made his way up, a very strange thing happened, which is the monster, the closer he got, began to look smaller. And this really puzzled him. Now it was half the size of the royal barge. But right then the monster turned towards him and belched fire and smoke, and Niobe ran back down a little ways. And when he looked back again, the monster was now 3 times as big as the royal barge. Well, this was very perplexing. So he decided, looking up at the moon and getting his strength from that rabbit, holding onto his dagger, he ran up the mountain as fast as he could. When he got to the top of the mountain, he didn't see anything there that needed killing. But down by his foot, he felt something warm. And he looked down, and there was the monster, and it was the size of a frog. Yes, it had the head of a crocodile, and the body of a hippopotamus, and the tail of a snake, but he could pick it up and hold it in his hand. And he patted the little monster on the back. And the monster made a sound that was a cross between a purr and the sound that a simmering cooking pot makes. And Niobe said, "You must be very lonely, living in this cave all by yourself. Would you come home with me and help me light my cooking fires?" And the monster nodded his head, and they started down the mountain. Well, when they got down there, the whole village had turned up to greet the conquering hero and to thank him for killing the monster. And of course this embarrassed Miyobi, and he said, I didn't kill the monster, he's right here in my hand. And everyone was amazed to see how tiny this fearful monster really was. And a little girl said to Miyobi, well, what's the monster's name? And Miyobi said, I don't know, I haven't asked him, what's your name? And the monster said, some call me famine, some call me pestilence, and the most pitiable of human beings call me by their own names. But most people call me what might happen. And so I love this story, and when I read it with third graders are brilliant. And every time I'd read this story with them every year, some child would come up with something I never thought of. So one third grader said to me, why is he living with his uncle? What happened to his parents? Maybe whatever happened to his parents, something terrible happened, and that's why he's afraid. And of course another child said, if he's such a big bad hunter, why does he enjoy teasing a scared little boy? You know, another great question. And one of my little boys said, I think the voice that he hears in the forest is really the voice of his own heart. So I do think this story holds a universal truth. You know, I was looking at your website, which has made me realize I needed to update my biography, and I saw the quote you have on there by Pema Chodron. If you are invested in security and certainty, you are living on the wrong planet. Pema Chodron, what a wonderful quote, you know. And this is a time of such great uncertainty. I mean, every day we're barraged with news that we can hardly believe. And we're seeing human values that we've long held as a country, no matter what our political affiliation, just getting smashed. And things that we thought we'd gotten over, like the vilification and targeting and scapegoating of the most vulnerable among us. You know, and so when I think about what might happen, well, some of those things are happening, you know, right now. Some of the things we've you know, been most afraid of seem to be happening all around us. So it's a time of real uncertainty where we can feel there's no safe place to stand, you know, and what's going to happen tomorrow. Well, you all know from coming here to this wonderful oasis in the Mission District and hearing Buddhist teachers speak that there are a lot of lists in Buddhism. And the 5 fears in Buddhism are the fear of death, the fear of illness, the fear of loss of livelihood, the fear of unusual states of mind, and the fear of speaking in front of assembly. And you know, of course, we can think of a lot of other fears. I mean, I know there's a word for the fear of clowns. I don't know what that word is. And of course, one of my deepest fears is being stuck at the airport with nothing to read. But you know, I think when we read these lists, they're like a finger pointing to the moon. They point to fears, and you may have a fear you've never even shared, you know, with another human being. I want to read something to you from Pema Chodron, from her marvelous book, The Places That Scare You. You know, I've shared this here before, but when my daughter was a teenager, I love Pema Chodron, and if anybody asks me what's the first book to read about Buddhism, I say When Things Fall Apart. So when Nova, my teenage daughter, came into the living room, I had some of Pema's books on the coffee table, you know, The Places That Scare You, and When Things Fall Apart, and you know, these different titles of her, you know, No Time to Lose. And Nova looked at those books and she said, geez, what a drama queen. And my editor at Shambhala, Ivan Burkholz, I told him that story, and so he was working on a documentary about Pema Chodron. He told her that story, and I knew she'd love that story. So one of the antidotes to fear is bodhicitta. And I want to read a little bit from her chapter, the first chapter in this book, The Excellence of Bodhicitta. When I was about 6 years old, I received the essential bodhicitta teaching from an old woman sitting in the sun. I was walking by her house one day feeling lonely, unloved, and mad, kicking anything I could find. And laughing, she said to me, "Little girl, don't you go letting life harden your heart." Right there, I received this pith instruction. We can let the circumstances of our life harden us so that we become increasingly resentful and afraid, or we can let them soften us and make us kinder and more open to what scares us. We always have this choice. If we were to ask the Buddha what is bodhicitta, he might tell us that this word is easier to understand than to translate. He might encourage us to seek out ways to find its meaning in our own lives. He might tantalize us by adding that it is only bodhicitta that heals, that bodhicitta is capable of transforming the hardest of hearts and the most prejudiced and fearful of minds. The most prejudiced and fearful of minds. This is what we're up against right now. People who are so prejudiced and so afraid that there are other human beings that they can't even see as human. What a fearful time we're living in right now. Citta means mind and also heart or attitude. Bodhi means awake, enlightened, or completely open. Sometimes the completely open mind and heart of bodhicitta is called the soft spot, a part in which it is equated in part with our ability to love, a place as vulnerable and as tender as an open wound. Even the cruelest people have this soft spot. Even the most vicious animals love their offspring. As Trungpa Rinpoche put it, everybody loves something, even if it's only tortillas. So bodhicitta, I love the way Pema talks about this, because often we want to harden our heart or turn away from it or heal it or try to fix it. But this broken part in us, if we make friends with it, if we make friends with the dark, with our fears, with our own narrow-mindedness and short-sightedness, this broken place is where we can connect with others. And when I was telling you that story, and I was telling you about the little rabbit, and this frightened boy saying, that voice is just as fearful as you. Don't you think you can help? It made me think of those of us in recovery who have to face the darkness of addiction and find healing by saying, I need help, and then accepting help and being able to help others. And, in addiction, we break our own hearts, but those broken hearts are how we connect with other people who are suffering. And whatever your path, however you've been broken, Hemingway said, everybody's broken, and the broken places are what make us stronger. My brother says, anything that doesn't kill you makes you tired. I love my brother. We were watching, my mother reminded me of this yesterday. My brother and I were watching TV when we were little, and TV was brand new when I was little, which ages us, of course. And there was a Duncan Hines commercial for cake mix. And it was touting this cake mix because it makes cakes that are so moist, And my brother and I had already watched a lot of commercials by that time, and my brother says, moist, moist. How come everything has to be moist? Oh, my brother Peter. When I was about 6 years old, the same age Pema Chodron was when she had her epiphany about bodhicitta, we had what we called a rummage drive at our school, where we each got this enormous paper potato sack, empty sack full of that we should fill with old clothes. Now, I have no idea why my mom didn't drive me or walk me to school that day. I was in first grade. we lived in Gregory Gardens in Pleasant Hill, and I carefully crossed the street with this huge bag, and my school was blocks away, so I ended up dragging the bag along the street. There were no sidewalks, and the bottom of the bag broke open, and all the clothes started spilling out, and I was standing there, just crying, and I know that my fear was I was going to get in trouble. And I can't tell you what happened. I don't know if a neighbor came out and helped me, or if somebody who might have known my family called my mom and asked for help. But what I realized in that moment was I was on my own. That nobody was going to come to my aid. This was what I thought was, oh my God, I'm I'm on my own. Now this idea has been disproved by my life, because I have wonderful, supportive friends and a thoughtful, loving daughter and excellent teachers, and in my recovery work I've had wonderful sponsors. But when something difficult comes up for me and I feel that old wound of being abandoned and alone, I just open up to that broken heart where the feeling, that fear that no one is going to come to my aid, no one is going to protect me. The old idea that I'm alone, and it's triggered by certain things that come up. Now, my parents were very young when they got married, and I have so much compassion for my mom, who's 99 years old. I visited her yesterday in her assisted living place in Oakland. And, when I think of her as being a 27-year-old woman stuck in this grim little stucco house in the suburbs with no extended family for all our extended family were many, many states away, I have so much compassion for her. But I've also had to have compassion for the neglected child that I was. The child that was left alone at home when I was way too young to be left alone. Which gave rise to that feeling, well, I'm on my own, So I can have compassion for that child, and I couldn't identify that feeling, that lonely, wind-blown feeling of loneliness, till I got sober and was able to face it and recognize it. Because, facing that fact, that neglect and that abandonment and the abuse that I experienced, that is going to a place that scares me, to face that. And I've only been able to face it with the clarity and support of sobriety and with Buddhist practice and the principles that save me every day, So it's really important to me to be aware of those hurts and wounds and fears when they're triggered. One of the most ancient ceremonies in Buddhism is the full moon ceremony. And in Buddhist communities, once a month, the Sangha gathers in two groups facing each other, and there are all kinds of bells and drums. And we chant, all my ancient twisted karma, from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion, born through body, speech, and mind, I now fully avow. And when I was new to practice and I first heard about the full moon ceremony, I thought, oh boy, we're going to go up on the roof of Zen Center and drink sake and write haiku poetry. No. The full moon ceremony, we chant, and there's, umpteen full prostrations to the floor, and we beat our breasts and, and inwardly admit our faults and all this. So, but it's a very cleansing and cathartic ceremony. And whenever I say those words, my ancient twisted karma, what I think about is my parents and my grandparents and their parents. And I think about my ancestors going all the way back to Scotland and Ireland, and wonderful Irish storytelling and big laughter, but also addiction and prejudice and all the decisions my ancestors made, for better or worse, that led to who I am. All of them are part of me. Though Buddha taught that there's no independent self apart from all those causes and conditions, There are layers of identity within each of us, within this one life, that echo back and forth. So, I'm a woman, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Buddhist, I'm a sober alcoholic, I'm a friend, a daughter, a sister, I'm a teacher, I'm a student, and a loving partner to my partner David. Each of these identities affects who I am and how I think of myself and how other people think of me. Identity can give us a feeling of belonging, of community. Our identities can also restrict us and narrow our point of view. I was just reading Way-Seeking Mind Talk by a Zen lay teacher who got kicked out of shul because he told the rabbi, what's all this about the chosen people? If God is God, then all people are chosen, not just us Jews. And he got kicked out of the shul forever, but he still was able to get bar mitzvahed. We can see all the mischief done in the world by people who are sure they know are right, who cling to identity and to a self-definition that shuts out other people that they're probably afraid of, people who are different that they can't understand, groups that believe that only people who believe as they do are going to be able to go to heaven. And some of our identities are temporary, like a certain job we have. I know when I retired from teaching kids, I was a little nervous about it. Like, who am I if I'm not teaching third graders? Which I did for 35 years. It's not surprising that I identified with that. And sometimes when those identities come to an end, we may have a feeling of fear or instability, not knowing who we are. My identity as a mother has shifted because my daughter's now 45 years old, but I think of motherhood as a kind of phantom limb, that I still worry about her. And I still want to protect her from suffering, and I carry her with me always, If we lose a job or a love, or if we move or get sober, or if we have a relapse, these fundamental changes affect our identity and can give rise to a feeling of groundlessness, a fear of the unknown. Who am I without this relationship? Who am I without this title, or this job? And these connections that make us feel a part of the world, a part of life, when they disappear, our attachment to identity, to people, to ideas, to old wounds, these can also be places where we get stuck. And one of the great gifts of Buddhist practice is that we can become aware of where we're stuck, And there's a wonderful word for this in Tibetan, shenpa. Shenpa is a word for a kind of sticky feeling, a kind of residue of negative feelings that we might carry around with us. And Pema gives an antidote to shenpa, that sticky feeling of fear and stuckness. She suggests staying with our own strong emotions and with the emotions of others without having to numb ourselves with preoccupations and habits of various kinds. And I've also come across a one-word mantra or a reminder that when we could call on when we get stuck in fear, which is stay. When we feel fearful, to just stay. Stay with it, examine it. Are my hands sweaty? Is my heart pounding? What exactly am I afraid of right now? And that's part of being in the present moment. And I feel from my own experience that if I'm fully in the present moment, instead of worrying about the future, when that future comes, I'll be able to deal with it in a deeper way because I'll be present for it. And this might sound really weird, but when I get frightened, I think, well, when I get there, I'm going to be there too. I'm not going to be alone. I'm going to be there with myself. That might seem like a weird idea, but I'm going to be there too, I'm going to be there with my fear and with my own experience of dealing with things in the past. So when we step onto the path of practice, it's time to, we feel the freedom of exercising our talents in the world, of opening up to other people, opening up to new ideas, letting go of the past and not wishing to change it, but letting go of it. And if we've spent a lot of our life living in self-destructive patterns, and if we've often acted out of instinct and impulsivity, just the practice of stay, or the practice of hesitating before we speak out or act, can be tremendously transformative. Just that simple thing, of taking a breath and thinking about, well, when I fling this harsh word out into the world, what will the consequences be? Am I going to do something I'm going to regret or need to make amends for later? And my teacher calls this the freedom of restraint, the freedom of not having to act on everything that comes to mind, which, was my definition of freedom in the past, was doing whatever I wanted without caring about the consequences. And of course, there are also times when we consult with our inmost self about a fear, and we recognize this is not the time to act. I don't feel ready to act. I don't feel ready to move forward with this. We can honor, our resistance and our fear. And we can regard everything that happens as the path. And, this is a little different than, sometimes people say everything happens for a reason. And I just cringe when I hear that, because it would be so cruel to say to a mother who's lost a child, well, everything happens for a reason. People say stupid things like that to people who've had a great loss, I think it's more, it seems to me that this implies that there's somebody, it seems to me when you say everything happens at a reason, it kind of implies that there's somebody out there doling out different experiences that will make us stronger and help us be better people, God doesn't give you more than you can handle, I don't know if you know the comedian Tig Notaro, but she famously came on stage and said, I've got breast cancer. And everybody laughed because they thought she was joking. She said, no, really, I've got breast cancer. And she said, she was thinking about people saying God doesn't give you more than you can handle. And she says, I just had a terrible breakup in a long-term relationship. My mother just died. Now I've got breast cancer. She says, I can just imagine God up there looking down and saying, I think I can give her just a little bit more. She can take it, And the angels are saying, God, are you crazy? Hasn't she suffered enough? God says, no, I've got this. I think she can take just a little bit more. So, this is a little different than regarding everything that happens as the path. Well, everything happens that happens, and I can face it fully with courage, and I can deal with it as best I can, with the confidence that comes from my support of my spiritual friends, my Buddhist practice, my study, my intention to live life with a full and open heart. All of these things will be with us when we face the crocodiles and the serpents and the monster that gets smaller the closer we get to it. So I want to close with a story. I don't know that I've told you this before, but I think it fits here. I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2023, and I didn't tell a lot of people about it because I didn't want to burden them with that till I had better news to tell them. So, and then now I'm on the other side of that, and I'm feeling great, and I had wonderful treatment at Kaiser. But I had surgery, and then I needed 5 days of radiation. And when I went to their center that Kaiser has out in Oyster Point, it's like a house, like a living room you go to, and people are so welcoming there. And I went there the first day for my radiation treatment, and I was in my room, in my little flimsy cotton gown, and I heard a knock on the door. I opened the door, and here's this handsome 45-year-old man standing there, and his name tag said Saji. And I said, Saji, that's an unusual name. There was a boy in my class the first year I taught third grade whose name was Saji. And he said, was he Palestinian? I said, yeah. He said, what school was that? I said, Alvarado Elementary. He said, Mrs. B, you were my teacher. And we hugged each other and we laughed and we cried. And he said, it means so much to me to be able to help you the way you helped me when I was little. He said, I was such a scared little boy. And now I'm married, I have 3 kids, I have this wonderful career. And you helped me when I was little, you know. And he was there every day for those 5 days. And that to me was just a mysterious, powerful experience of, it was this kind of reassurance that, oh my God, that was a good thing I did teaching kids. You know, that was a good thing that I did. And when they come back to me, Grisha and I were talking about this earlier, when we see our former students, it's like this wonderful voice from the past tapping you on the shoulder saying, remember me, you were there for me. You know, so I'd like to dedicate this talk to Saji and the 700 kids I taught who, you know, changed my life, really. So thank you very much. Well, that took me by surprise. So the floor is open. The topic is, maybe the topic is, how does our fear get smaller as we get closer to it? Or how can we be present for fear? Or whatever's come up for you during this talk about your own life and your own practice. I'd love to hear from you. And let's say our names when we speak, too.
I'm Bob. I can only thank you for all the wisdom that you presented today, how relevant it was. You reminded me of something I had heard years ago about the only time you can have courage is when you're afraid.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the message you offered today. It's so easy to be afraid with what's going on in this country now. So I really appreciate what you said, what you reminded me of, and what I probably will be using every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Yeah. You know, one thing that strikes me about what's going on in our country now is we can return to our own vow to be a loving person, to be open-hearted, and to not turn our backs on other people, and to find our courage wherever we can, you know. It's a very difficult time. Someone else? Yes, Grisha.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. The fears that you listed, the list of fears, you know, the illness one, like, I live in a fear, and we know it's coming, like everybody's old age, sickness, and death, so I live in fear of my siblings, especially, because I'm the baby of 6, so I'm waiting for that call. I know it's coming one day, if it's not me that's being called out.
Yeah.
But the way that boy went to the mountain, and once you get there, once you're in that thing you're afraid of, you know, like in the program we say we intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. And I'm in that. A week ago, I was at my friend Mason Pamela's house, and she found this lump, and she was feeling it, and she got on the ground, and I was feeling it, and it was a big lump, and we were like, oh geez, you know, it's called the device hotline, and it turns out she has bone cancer, most likely. So like really devastating. You know, like the anvil has dropped, and we, you know, somehow we just know what to do. You know, just love each other to death, and go to the first doctor's appointment, and then give each other updates, and be in it together, and can't turn away from it because it's so intense. You know? It's like so. Anyway, I feel the three of us. In this, I mean, she has tons of friends and family, and you know, with their arms around her. But we also have the Buddhist practice and 12-step practices
Yeah.
to get us through it. So, yeah, here we go. You know, it's kind of like just what you thought, which is what you feared the most. It happens. It's gonna happen.
Grisha, say your friend's name again.
Pamela has is in the middle of being diagnosed, but it's
Okay.
very likely.
Pamela.
Her wife Mace.
Pamela. Thank you. Andrea.
Hi, Andrea. Thank you, Laura. I think life is always about facing fear. I don't know, there's not a day that I don't have some fear of something. And I like the reminder, and what is helpful for me is what is happening right now, and what do I know, and that pause. And I think I once spoke with you and you said you'll know what to do when it's time to do it. But when I grew up, I was alone, and I always had to have a plan and fix things. And it's so contrary for me to take a step back and just say, I don't know. I'm so afraid.
Yeah.
And with the spirit, with my spiritual community, with my 12-step community, with the teachers along the way, and with a lot of experience, I don't think I think you get to a certain age and it's a lot about losing people. And what I've learned about that is that I've had a lot of experience with that. And what's more important than worrying about losing them is being sure that you're loving them and you're being there for them today.
Yeah.
How they want you to be there. And that is the hardest thing, because I have the answers and they don't want my answers.
Yeah.
And I just thank you for the reminder. And like I said, I don't think there's many days where I'm not afraid of something. And it's an old wish usually, or something that never even happened. And but I can chew it to death. And I'm glad for the pause, for the people that remind me, for just the joy that is also there.
Yeah.
And I had a week of the Russian River, swimming in the river, going to the ocean, going to some gardens, Dahlia gardens, being fully present with music, with people, and I think it's the antidote to not falling into the hole of fear, is to get some kind of balance.
Yeah.
And when I'm deep in fear, I sometimes need someone to give me a flashlight.
Thanks, Andrea. Thanks for reminding me of something I wanted to say, which is I try to remind myself if I'm afraid of something that I think might happen, to remind myself when it doesn't happen. Did that actually, wait, I was so afraid of it. Did it happen? No, it didn't happen. And I would do that exercise with my third graders as well. You also reminded me of Eleanor Roosevelt saying, every day do something that scares you. Yeah, what a woman she was. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Jeff on the line has a question.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Laura. Thanks for.
You made it. Oh, sorry. Tell him he's muted. Please unmute yourself, Jeff. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for a wonderful talk. Once again, you brought great inspiration, and your part early in the talk when you were talking about a rabbit and the emptiness in our heart reminded me of a cartoon I once saw. I wish I thought I have it somewhere in a stack of papers, but a miracle happened in that I could find it online. So I want to share a screen with you and read the captions. It's about having a hole in your heart. For reasons unexplained, every person in the world is born with a large gaping hole in the center of their chest. While not uncomfortable, it's widely considered unsightly, and pretty much everyone tries to fill it with something. Some people fill it with religion, others just buy a bunch of stuff, and some even fill it with other folks. I left mine alone though, because I found out if you run against the wind at just the right angle, it makes a whistling noise.
That's great. Oh, thank you, Jeff. Well, let me share something with you, a cartoon I saw. I came across this New Yorker that I held onto for some reason from 1985. And in this is so unbelievable. There's a cartoon in there, 1985. It's a man standing in his backyard looking up at the moon, and he's calling his wife out, honey, come take a look at this. And the moon says, on the moon it says, Trump, formerly the moon. Get it? In 1985, he was putting his name on things, and now we're dealing with him every day. There's another great cartoon in the New Yorker. I never knew my husband was a drunk till he came home one night, stone cold sober. I think we have time for one or two more.
Jeff has a question and Tom.
Laura, thank you so much. You know, when you were talking about God can't give us any more than we can handle, you know, sort of the silliness of that. You know, it reminds me like the one person who survives a plane crash is convinced that their life has some special meaning, you know, and I'm thinking like, well, if the person next to you had survived and you had died, they'd be saying the same thing. So it's really like the prize you get for musical seats, you know, last one standing gets the prize. But you know, that might be sort of a negative view, like only the people who survive can say, you know, oh, you know, I've made it, whatever. But on a positive note, you know, the flip side of that coin was this little aphorism I put on the wall next to my mother's bed when she started living alone. And because I knew it weighed on her. And it said, so far, my track record for getting through difficult days is 100%. And that's pretty good.
I like that. It's like what you said, Andrea. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm Ricky.
Hi, Ricky.
Thank you, Laura. This was something I'm going to be thinking about and just being nourished by the talk today. Thank you. I have a question about Shenpa, the sticky feelings and spaces. In one of the 12-step programs I work, the original laundry list of traits, now it says addiction to excitement, but the first version said addiction to fear. And so for me, sometimes the sticky spaces, the fear or the anger, I want to stay in them. So they're not like sticky, like gross, ew. They're like more. They're a high, they're a current. And so because of that, sometimes the pausing and the trying to notice my body or be like, where am I feeling this? Feels like, okay, well, get over the, like, do the mindfulness thing so we get back to the adrenaline. Because this, like, I want the stress, even though it also exhausts me and harms me. And this is part of the recovery and the working with these addicted or these habit energies.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if what, and maybe this is a very complex question, so if there's another space for me to look further, but how to work with those sort of sticky spaces that also feel intoxicating and, you know, yeah.
Thank you, Ricky. That's a wonderful question. I think that the first thing is what you said is to not immediately push it away or deny it. It only becomes stronger that way. You know, a book I recommend to people is Buddha's Brain by Rick Hansen. And when I was preparing for class on brain science and Buddhism, I felt a little sheepish about even saying that out loud, but there is some wonderful information about the brain. And a phrase I came across a lot was, the brain is Teflon for negative experiences. I'm sorry. the brain is Velcro for negative experiences and Teflon for positive experiences. And what you described so beautifully is we're comfortable in that habitual space. You know, we're comfortable with our depression. I know that feeling. You know, why would I want to step out of that into some unknown realm? So I think what you're talking about is having a balance between recognizing that that's a comfortable space for you, or even an exciting space, and maybe part of your identity even, you know, that you think of as yourself in that way, and honoring that, but also being willing to step outside of it and see what else is there. You know, one thing about coming into recovery from addiction is we don't know that on the other side of that brick wall of addiction is this incredible world of life and light and true friends and a way to live, because we're so comfortable in that dark, drunk spot where we know that. It's not great, but it's what we're familiar with. And so these are neural pathways in our brain that we just go back to like the grooves in a record. And what we have to do if we want to change is if we want to transform ourselves or become who we actually are, you know, is to build other neural pathways in our brain. The things that Andrea mentioned, you know, swimming in the Russian River, enjoying the sunshine, going to the ocean, listening to music. If we turn towards those wholesome, positive things, we can recognize and even honor the darkness that's enriched our life. You know, I'm not sorry I was an active alcoholic. It led me to my truer path. But I have to be careful and remember that I can turn in a different direction now. I don't have to turn back into that darkness. And by the way, that cartoon about the hole in your heart, that's something we know in recovery, that I had a hole in my heart that I filled with substances because I didn't want to feel what I felt. I love that cartoon. It's so human. You know, we all have a hole in our heart that came from something. So I think what you're talking about is finding some equanimity between the darkness and the light, and finding a place to dwell where you're neither turning your back on who you've been or turning your back on your true self, which is always with you anyway. You know, Myobi was always brave. He just didn't know it. So thank you.
Okay, we'll gather for the dedication of merit.
Taking a deep breath together and thanking the trees for our oxygen. We offer the merit of our practice to all beings in the 10 directions, past, present, and future, to our parents and their parents and their parents. And may we be a light in the darkness when we feel afraid. May we know that we can also use that fear and that humanness to turn towards another suffering person and offer a hand in the darkness. May all beings be happy. May they be joyous and live in safety. I almost said keep coming back.